Hey, it's Buckner-Evans. I'm here with Paul Edwards from Loan Depot. We have worked together for a couple of years now on various transactions, loans, and things like that. And so I wanted to interview a lender because we often get lender questions, and we really need an expert in the field versus us. We're good for real estate, you're good with lending. So that's what we're going to do today. One of the first things I want to ask you is just how long have you been in lending and how did you get into the industry?
Oh my gosh, I've been in lending, I want to say for the past 12 years or so. And I kind of got into it just by happenstance. I started off as a mortgage loan processor for a local bank, just kind of got into the operations of it all. And I did operations for about 5 or 6 years before I started originating.
Okay.
And I made the change because I really enjoyed working directly with people as opposed to like working with underwriters. I love my underwriters,
yes.
But I like working with the buyers and clients and stuff.
Now, a lot of people ask about first-time homebuyer programs. However, I think that it's interesting to people to find out what a first-time homebuyer is. Tell us who qualifies for first-time home buying.
It's such a funny thing because it's not a literal term, right? Like in the sense, anybody who hasn't owned a house, and I mean primary residence, okay? So you can own other real estate, but it's your primary residence for the past 3 years. So it's more of a legal term than it is a literal term. So you can be born again as a first-time home buyer as long as you haven't owned your principal residence for the past 3 years.
Awesome. So that definitely changes some things. So tell us also, one of the things that we get a lot is how much does it cost for down payment? Do we need 20% down every single time?
That's such a good question because it depends. 20% down you definitely don't need as a first-time home buyer. And dodge on the question a little bit because it really depends on the program, right? So like for conventional loans, their minimum down payment can be as low as 3%. FHA, by and large, FHA minimum down payment there is 3.5%. USDA loans, that's something we have in Oklahoma. Depending on location, you can be eligible for that and some other factors. They don't even require a down payment. And then there's VA loans. Those also don't require a down payment. So you can take loans that sometimes do, your conventional and your FHA, and then you can bring in programs sometimes too for first-time home buyers that offer down payment assistance. So then it takes over most of your down payment. Those are coming into popularity quite a bit.
Okay, how do you calculate information that people have brought to you? I reached out to you recently and said, I have a person, she said she makes $70,000 a year. What's the range in which she can buy without you knowing her credit score? Now, I obviously knew there's a lot of variables here. Is there a good calculator that people can use?
I do have a good calculator on my website to calculate what payments are. The honest answer, I feel like, though, is you're going to have to talk to a mortgage lender for them to really hone that in for you. Because when we're looking at income, the thing we're backing into as lenders is what's called the debt-to-income ratio. There's almost like a sliding scale in a sense as what the debt-to-income ratio requirement would be depending on credit scores, depending on loan programs, and other things like that. Plus also what debt load somebody might currently have. What are their car payments like, credit cards that they have, student loans, other kind of lending that they might be participating in. That could also come into the equation as to how much of a house they could buy.
Okay, so you have good faith estimates. Those are things that when you talk to a lender, that's one thing you should know. I come across people who don't get good faith estimates from their lender. That separates a good lender from a not so great lender. Tell me what goes into those estimates. I think that people see $200,000 house divided by 30 years, and this is my this is my payment. What all goes into a payment?
So when it comes to these estimates that we put together, we're trying to come down to two numbers ultimately, which is going to be what is the monthly payment going to be, okay, and what goes into that payment, but then also how much money does someone need to bring to closing to fund the transaction, right? Which could be a combination of down payment and closing costs. And then in there is all the details, right? Closing costs is a pretty big basket with a lot of different things in there. And you can see some variances between, one loan program to the other as to what your closing costs could be. An example of this is a lot of the down payment assistance programs that exist. They sometimes have higher closing costs, but it can make sense at times because you're getting assistance to take over some of those charges. The other thing that when you're looking at these closing cost estimates and stuff like that, and these good faith estimates, is APR.
Yes.
APR is something that is different than interest rate, for instance. Interest rate goes into your payback on the loan, whereas APR is a number that's taking into consideration not just your interest rate, but fees. Some of them one-time in nature, and some of them might be reoccurring, like mortgage insurance. So APR is typically going to be higher than what your interest rate is.
One thing that I've noticed to tell people, especially when you're looking at these online lenders, people are seeing, oh, I got this great interest rate, it's way lower. And then when I tell them, can you please go with a local lender and just compare the two APRs, you'll find that there are these really big fees. So you're paying that interest rate, you're paying the cost of it, you're just paying it up front, as opposed to working with a local lender who is a little more truthful in their lending.
Yeah.
Not to bash them, just you can compare the apples to apples versus kind of, at that point, you're comparing apples to oranges.
Right. So when you're looking at down payment assistance programs, you're typically locked into one rate in almost like one APR. But when you're not doing down payment assistance, you actually have kind of a menu of rates and APRs you can pick from. And you're right, with online lenders, they typically go to the low rate, low APR, but what you're not necessarily seeing is that there's a lot of buy down points in there and your cash to close can be a lot higher. So I try to offer my people the menu, right? You can see what all the options are and you can kind of see what different APRs can be available instead of just the clickbait, right? The one to get people to click.
Yes. Now let's talk about cash under the mattress. So you talk about that a lot. As far as people who may have been saving up and they put it under their mattress or put it somewhere that's not in a bank.
The Dave Ramsey plan.
Yes.
Yep.
What does that look like when someone comes to you and they've deposited $50,000 cash into their bank and they say, we're ready to buy, we found the house we love?
Cash is a challenge because of how it can be untraceable. Okay, but there is language in guidelines that can sometimes allow for cash. What you're really looking at, especially from an underwriting perspective and a lending perspective, is cash a part of their normal income behavior? Bartenders, right? Servers, people that get tipped cash, sometimes like car dealers at casinos, like they might end up with cash. As long as it fits within their line of work, it can make sense and can be allowed.
Okay.
I've been allowed to at times where if you've got a client that exhibits a pattern of behavior where they only get paper checks, right? They take those to the bank. They maybe deposit some that take cash out. Sometimes cash can be allowed there too. It really depends on the context of the situation and the story you can tell the underwriter.
Okay.
But if it's direct deposit and then suddenly you come along, your income's just direct deposit and you come along and you've got 50 grand in cash, that might be a challenge. What I recommend to people in cases like that is what we call seasoning. What that means is you need to put that in the bank and then you need to wait until about 2 months of bank statements do not show the deposit. That is something that mortgage lenders use at a time, but you have to be a little bit patient, right? Because when you hear about that, you need to get that in the bank as soon as possible, and then the clock starts ticking, you wait for time to go by, and then we might be able to use those funds later for a purchase.
Yes, very true. Is there anything else that you get asked often as a lender?
I feel like these questions we just went over are like the normal thing. The next thing that usually comes up that we haven't really dove into is about credit scores.
Okay.
Yeah, and the reality with credit scores is that is the key. Having a strong credit score is the key for a lot of success with down payment assistance and with first-time home buyers. So taking your credit score seriously and understanding how you can engineer a higher score is something I try to walk people through regularly and get them to understand, because it's something you unfortunately can't ignore. And there's a lot of things that kind of work against people too. Like there can be problems that they didn't know about, and sometimes I can make them aware and we can address it quickly and get ready to buy a house in like 3 months or something like that, or sometimes sooner. The whole credit score system is a challenge to begin with, but one thing we offer right now is upfront when a client first applies, we'll only do a soft credit pull. So we're not going to deem someone's credit right away. Now, ultimately, we do need to do a hard inquiry, but that can make that introductory conversation a little bit easier and not as impactful on someone's credit.
That's amazing. And then one thing to know is that people are going on Credit Karma looking at those things, but you guys
Right.
use the middle score as opposed to the highest score. Am I correct?
Yeah, so first of all, when it comes to credit scores, we have 3 credit bureaus. Okay, so they're going to calculate your score different ways. But each credit bureau has about, I want to say, 7 to 9 different ways to calculate that score depending on the type of loan you're applying for. So another way to think of it is car loans, credit cards, and mortgages are going to have different scoring systems.
Okay.
And then you spread that across 3 bureaus, suddenly I have like over 20 credit scores, right? So you've got those free tools, Credit Karma, I think Experian's got something like that. Those can be really helpful in like testing the temperature on your score, but they're not gonna be 100% accurate. Because they can't be, right?
Right.
How are they gonna show you all 20 of your scores when you only see like 2 or 3?
Yes.
So there is some services out there you can pay for. I think one of them is myfico.com. I think it costs $40, but you can see all your scores if you use that. It's just not free.
Okay, that's good to know too. All right, well, I think that one of the things that we just want to talk about, especially as a realtor, is that we always want you to go to the lender first.
Yeah.
We want you to know how much buying power you have, because $300,000 looks a lot different than $100,000, and we just want to set your expectations so that you can know what you're looking for.
And get an estimate as to what that monthly payment could be and how much money you might need to bring to closing.
Correct. Well, thank you, Paul. This
Yeah,
was
you
very
bet.
informative.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.